Before we begin, this story explores themes of psychological distress and unexplained phenomena. Listener discretion is advised. Imagine a story so captivating, so utterly consuming, that finishing it meant finishing you. Not metaphorically, not as some abstract intellectual death, but a final, absolute cessation of life itself. A story that, by its very existence, is a ticking time bomb, and the final word is the detonator. That's what happened to Sarah. It started subtly, as these things always do. A late-night call from my friend, Sarah Jenkins. Her voice was usually a melodic hum, filled with the kind of academic enthusiasm that made even ancient Sumerian texts sound exciting. But that night, it was a frantic whisper, laced with a fear I'd never heard from her before. "Alex, you have to believe me," she'd stammered, her breath catching. It's real. The stories. They're not just myths." I was half asleep, sprawled on my couch, a forgotten book on my chest. "Sarah, what are you talking about? Are you still up translating that old manuscript?" Sarah was a brilliant linguist, obsessed with obscure texts and forgotten languages. She'd been working on something particularly archaic for months, holed up in her apartment, emerging only for coffee and the occasional rant about dead languages. "It's not old, Alex. It's timeless. And it's aware." Her voice dropped to an almost inaudible register. "I think it's trying to finish itself. And I'm the one reading it." I chuckled, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "Sounds like you need a break, Sarah. Go to bed." "No, you don't understand. There are passages. I've been cross-referencing, Alex. There are references, subtle ones, to people who finished reading certain parts, and then they were just gone. Unexplained. Like they dissolved into the narrative." I sighed, already mentally formulating an excuse to hang up. "Sarah, you're exhausted. Get some sleep. We'll talk about your sentient manuscript in the morning." There was a long silence on the other end, so profound it made the hairs on my arms stand up. Then a single choked word. "Alex, don't." The line went dead. I tried calling her back, but it went straight to voicemail. I shrugged it off, attributing it to her eccentric academic intensity. Sarah was prone to hyperbole when she was deep into a project. I figured she just crashed from exhaustion. I was wrong. Terribly, catastrophically wrong. The next morning, a call from Detective Miller jolted me awake. He was terse, his voice tight. "Mr. Thompson? This is Detective Miller. I'm calling about Sarah Jenkins. We found your number in her contacts. We need you to come down to her apartment." My stomach dropped. I dressed in a haze, the memory of Sarah's terrified whisper echoing in my ears. The drive to her apartment felt like traveling through molasses, every street sign a blurred accusation. Her building was swarming with emergency vehicles, their lights flashing a silent, urgent rhythm against the stark brickwork. Police tape cordoned off the entrance. A growing knot of curious neighbors watched from across the street, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and grim concern. Detective Miller met me at the door to Sarah's apartment, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Thompson, thanks for coming." He gestured me inside. The apartment, usually a chaotic but homely jumble of books, notes, and half-empty coffee cups, was now unnervingly pristine. No overturned furniture, no signs of a struggle. It was almost too neat, like a stage set after the final act. And then I saw her. Sarah was in her favorite armchair, nestled by the window, bathed in the soft morning light. She looked peaceful, more peaceful than I'd ever seen her. A faint, almost serene smile on her lips, her eyes wide open, staring at nothing. Her laptop was open on the small table beside her, its screen displaying a dense block of text in a script I didn't recognize. Her hands were folded gently in her lap, a single loose page of notes clutched between her fingers. There were no visible injuries, no blood, no sign of violence. Just Sarah, utterly still, utterly silent. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with an unspoken presence. It wasn't the smell of death, but something colder, more profound. An absence. Detective Miller cleared his throat, pulling me back from the abyss of my shock. "We found her this morning. Landlord called us after she didn't respond to his knocks. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. Forensics are still working, but it's baffling." "What happened?" I managed to choke out, my voice raw. "That's what we're trying to figure out, Mr. Thompson. No obvious cause of death. No poison detected in preliminary tests. Her medical history shows no pre-existing conditions. She was a healthy young woman. He paused, looking around the room, his gaze lingering on the laptop screen. It's like she just stopped. She called me last night, I said, the words tumbling out. She was scared. She said something about a story that was aware and trying to finish itself. Miller raised an eyebrow, a flicker of skepticism in his eyes. A story? Like a book. I pointed to the laptop. She was working on some kind of ancient text, translating it. She said it was dangerous. He walked over, peering at the screen. Looks like a bunch of squiggles to me. We'll bag it as evidence, of course. Anything you can tell us about what she was working on? I shook my head, my mind racing. She called it the Obsidian Chronicle sometimes. Said it was extremely rare, possibly unique. A digital copy she found in some obscure academic archive. Over the next few days, the official report came back. Unexplained cardiac arrest. A convenient, medically vague phrase for, we have no idea. The police closed the case, filing it as a tragic, natural death. But I knew it wasn't natural. Sarah's last terrified whisper haunted me. Don't. Grief quickly transformed into a desperate need for answers. I couldn't just let her death be a bureaucratic footnote. Sarah's life, her brilliant mind, couldn't just vanish without a trace. I started my own investigation, fueled by guilt and a gnawing dread. I gained access to Sarah's cloud storage and her personal computer after navigating a maze of legal paperwork. Her research files were meticulously organized, a testament to her academic rigor. And there it was, a folder labeled Obsidian Chronicle. Inside, hundreds of pages of digital text, a mixture of ancient glyphs and Sarah's meticulous translations. I started sifting through her recent emails and chat logs. There were exchanges with a few other obscure scholars, discussing the difficulty of the text, its unusual structure, and its unsettling themes. One email from Sarah to a Dr. Eleanor Vance, dated just a week before her death, caught my eye. Eleanor. I'm getting an increasingly uneasy feeling about the Chronicle. The more I translate, the more I find these recursive patterns, not just in the language but in the narrative itself. It describes events that mirror the act of reading it. And the fates of the readers within the story, they're always the same. A sudden quiet cessation, like their existence simply ends. I spent days, then weeks, burrowing deeper into Sarah's research. I learned about the history of the Obsidian Chronicle, or rather the lack of one. No known physical copies, no definitive origin. It just appeared in various digital archives, always fragmented, always elusive, always attributed to unknown sources. It was a ghost in the machine, a digital specter. As I dug further, a chilling pattern began to emerge. Sarah wasn't the first. There were whispers, rumors, obscure forum posts, and forgotten news articles about other scholars, linguists, and even amateur historians who had met similar, sudden, inexplicable ends. All of them, it turned out, had recently been obsessed with the same elusive digital text. The Obsidian Chronicle. There was Michael Chun, a brilliant young cryptographer who died in his sleep in Chicago, just weeks after posting excitedly about a breakthrough in translating a particularly difficult section. Emily Hayes, a graduate student in Boston, found unresponsive at her desk, surrounded by notes on ancient symbology. David Rodriguez, a retired professor, collapsed in his study in Arizona, his tablet displaying the final page of a translation he'd been working on for years. In every case, the official cause of death was vague and inconclusive. Cardiac arrest. Undetermined natural causes. No foul play. No evidence of a struggle. Just a sudden, peaceful, terrifying end. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. The story wasn't just about death. It was death. I went back to Sarah's files, specifically to a folder she'd labeled, "Do Not Open." My hands trembled as I clicked it. Inside there was a single unsent email draft addressed to me. The subject line was stark. It's not a story. It's a trap. The body of the email read, Alex, if you're reading this, it means I was too late. I finished it. Or rather, it finished me. The Chronicle isn't just text. It's an entity, a parasite that feeds on completion. It guides its reader subtly, meticulously towards its own end. And when you reach that end, you become part of it. You cease to exist outside of its narrative. I see it now. The patterns. The way the words twist, turning your own thoughts against you. compelling you to continue, to understand, to reach the final period. The ultimate irony, the ultimate seduction. Asterisk. Asterisk, don't look for me, Alex. Don't try to understand. Whatever you do, do not read it. Do not open the final section. Do not complete the Obsidian Chronicle. It knows. It waits. And it kills whoever finishes it. Asterisk. Below her warning there was a single chilling hyperlink. It led directly to the final untranslated section of The Obsidian Chronicle. The part Sarah had been working on. The part she had just finished. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. The cursor hovered over the link, a tiny blinking invitation to my own potential demise. Sarah's words screamed in my mind. Asterisk, don't. Asterisk. But how could I not? How could I walk away, leaving her death an unsolved mystery, leaving this insidious story free to claim more victims? The fear was a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but beneath it, a desperate, burning need for answers ignited. I had to know. I had to understand what had killed my friend. I had to read it. The cursor blinked, a relentless pulse against the blank digital page. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly. The file, simply titled The Chronicle of the Whispering Stone, sat open, its first line a dark, beckoning void. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to close it, to run, to forget everything I had seen, everything I had lost. But Michael's face, pale and distorted in death, flashed behind my eyes. His final desperate gasp echoed in the silent room. How could I walk away? How could I let this thing continue its silent rampage? I took a deep, shuddering breath, the air tasting like fear. My gaze dropped to the screen, forcing myself to focus on the words. Asterisk, the old man Silas found it tucked away in the forgotten corner of the attic, nestled amidst decades of dust and the ghosts of cherished memories. It wasn't a book, not exactly. More a collection of loose, unbound pages, brittle with age, tied together with a length of faded crimson ribbon. The paper was unusually thick, almost like parchment, and the ink, a deep, unsettling black, seemed to pulse with a faint, almost imperceptible light. Asterisk. A shiver traced its way down my spine, not entirely from the chill of the air conditioning. It was a familiar sensation, the kind you get when you're utterly alone but feel an unseen presence. I dismissed it as nerves, a natural reaction to the morbid situation. My eyes scanned the next paragraph. Asterisk. Silas was a man of quiet habits, a retired librarian who cherished the forgotten. He'd spent his life sifting through the remnants of other people's stories, finding comfort in their silent company. But this felt different. The pages hummed with an almost palpable energy, a silent whisper against his fingertips. There were no titles, no author names, just a series of intricate, almost alien symbols adorning the first page, swirling around a single stark sentence. To know is to become, to finish is to cease. Asterisk. My breath hitched. To know is to become, to finish is to cease. The words seemed to jump off the screen, sinking their hooks into my mind. A dull ache began to throb behind my left eye, a pressure building steadily. It was probably just the strain of staring at the screen combined with the stress I was under. I rubbed my temples, trying to massage away the burgeoning headache. I continued to read, drawn in despite myself. The story described Silas's growing obsession, his meticulous deciphering of the strange symbols, which slowly revealed themselves to be an ancient, forgotten script. The narrative detailed his nights spent hunched over the parchment, the flickering lamplight casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock his solitude. As he read, the story claimed Silas began to notice changes, subtle at first. The scent of ozone in his study when there was no storm, the persistent feeling of being watched, even in the dead of night. The way the shadows in his peripheral vision seemed to deepen, to coalesce into fleeting, indistinct shapes that vanished when he turned his head. My own study felt colder now, the shadows in its corners seeming to stretch and writhe. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. Was I just projecting? Was my mind playing tricks on me, fueled by fear and sleep deprivation? The headache intensified, a sharp, insistent stab behind my eye. My stomach churned, a vague nausea rising in my throat. This was too much too soon. I needed to step away, but I couldn't. My gaze was locked on the screen, compelled by an invisible force. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, horrifying, yet impossible to avert your eyes from. The story continued, detailing how Silas, increasingly isolated and consumed, began to perceive the world differently. Colors seemed sharper, sounds more resonant, but also distorted, alien. He heard whispers in the silence, not distinct words, but a cacophony of soft, insistent murmurs, just at the edge of hearing, like 1,000 tiny voices trying to break through a wall. A faint, almost imperceptible buzzing started in my ears, a high-pitched whine that seemed to resonate deep within my skull. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just my imagination anymore. This was happening, just like it had happened to Michael. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling as I dialed Jessica's number. She was my oldest friend, pragmatic, grounded, and usually the voice of reason when my own thoughts spiraled. The phone rang 3 times before she answered, her voice bright and cheerful, a stark contrast to the growing dread in my own world. "Hey, what's up?" she asked. "Jess, I need to tell you something," I stammered, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. "It's about Michael. And in this story," I quickly, haltingly recounted everything. Michael's death, the cryptic warning, my decision to read the file. I described the symptoms I was experiencing, the headache, the nausea, the buzzing, the feeling of being watched. Jessica listened patiently, her initial cheerfulness fading into a quiet concern. "Okay, slow down," she said, her voice softening. "You've been through a lot. You're exhausted, you're grieving. It's completely normal to feel paranoid. Your mind is probably just playing tricks on you. You should probably just close that file and get some sleep." "No, Jess, you don't understand," I insisted, my voice rising in desperation. "It's real. The buzzing, the headache. It's exactly what Michael described before he died. He said he felt like his brain was being stretched, like something was trying to get in." There was a moment of silence on her end. "Look, I know what you're saying sounds intense, but it also sounds like a panic attack mixed with a severe lack of sleep. Maybe you should come over? We can watch a dumb movie. Get your mind off it." I appreciated her concern, but her skepticism was a brick wall. How could I make her understand? "I can't, Jess. I feel like I have to keep reading. Like if I stop, something worse will happen or I'll miss something vital. And if I leave this story, who knows what it'll do next?" "That's the grief talking," she said gently. "You're looking for answers where there aren't any, trying to find a reason for something senseless. Michael had a heart attack, right? Or something similar. The doctors couldn't explain it fully, but it wasn't a cursed story. They couldn't explain it at all, Jess. They called it an anomalous cerebral hemorrhage, a complete systemic shutdown with no prior indicators. It was like his body just gave up. And he had that exact file open on his screen. The same file I'm reading right now." My voice cracked. She sighed. "Okay, look, if you're really that worried, just save the file, close it, and send it to me. I'll open it on my end, see if anything weird happens. If it does, then maybe we can talk about ancient curses. But for now, you need to step away from the screen." Her suggestion, while well-intentioned, felt like a dangerous gamble. If this thing was contagious, if it could spread, I couldn't risk her. No, I can't. I don't want to put you in danger. I needed to tell someone. I needed to hear a sane voice. You heard it. Now be smart. Close the story," she urged. But I couldn't. The pull was too strong. I muttered a quick goodbye, promising to call her back later, and hung up before she could argue further. My gaze was already back on the screen. The buzzing in my ears had intensified, a high-pitched whine that now seemed to include faint, overlapping whispers, just beyond comprehension. The headache was a relentless drumbeat. The story of Silas continued. He had started seeing the symbols from the first page everywhere. In the patterns of cracked plaster on his ceiling, in the swirling foam of his morning coffee, in the intricate veins of a fallen leaf. They were not mere coincidences. They were precise, identical replicas of the alien script, appearing and dissipating in the blink of an eye, leaving him questioning his sanity. He began to believe the symbols were not just a language but a key, a conduit. As I read this, a dizzying wave washed over me. The text on the screen seemed to shimmer, the letters momentarily rearranging themselves into patterns that looked eerily similar to the symbols Silas was seeing. My heart leaped into my throat. This wasn't just a story about something insidious. It was the insidious thing. It was manifesting. I tried to look away to break the spell, but my eyes felt glued. The words blurred, then sharpened, demanding my attention. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with an unspoken presence. I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck, even though the window was closed and there was no draft. My skin crawled, I frantically typed stories that kill you into a search engine. The results were a mix of urban legends, creepypastas about haunted video games, and articles debunking such myths. Nothing about a specific real-world digital file. Nothing that resonated with the cold, hard reality of what I was experiencing. I scrolled down, my panic rising. Then a small obscure forum post caught my eye. Buried deep on the third page of results. The title was innocuous. Anyone else ever feel watched after reading certain things? The post itself was from years ago. A user named Shadowseeker describing vague unease, headaches, and a sense of being pulled into a story they couldn't name. It was dismissed by others as overactive imagination, but one comment stood out, from a user named Librarian Ghost. Be careful what you read. Some stories aren't meant to be finished. The knowledge they impart can be transformative, not in a good way. Transformative. The word echoed the story's own chilling phrase. To know is to become. A cold dread settled deep in my bones. This wasn't just about dying. It was about changing. Michael hadn't just died. His body had undergone an anomalous cerebral hemorrhage, a complete systemic shutdown. What if the story didn't just kill you, but transformed you into something else, something unrecognizable, something that then ceased to be? The screen flickered. A single, dark symbol, identical to one Silas had seen in the story, momentarily superimposed itself over the text, glowing with a faint, internal light, before vanishing as quickly as it appeared. My breath caught in my throat. This was no longer just a headache or a buzzing. This was a direct, undeniable manifestation. The story was reaching out. It was no longer just words on a screen. It was real, and it was happening to me. I gripped the edge of my desk, my knuckles white. The compulsion to read was now an overwhelming tide, pulling me deeper. I had to understand what these symbols meant. I had to understand what Silas had discovered. I had to finish it. The paradox was crushing. The very act of seeking answers was the path to my own destruction. But what if not finishing it was worse? What if stopping meant leaving myself vulnerable to whatever dormant horror this story had already awakened within me? The thought was a chilling realization, a new kind of terror. What if Michael hadn't finished it in time? What if that's why his death was so violent, so inexplicable? My head pounded, a frantic drum against my skull. My vision blurred, and the whispers in my ears coalesced into a distinct guttural murmur. A language I didn't understand, yet felt intrinsically familiar. It was as if my very mind was being rewired, retuned to a frequency I was never meant to perceive. The story was no longer just being read. It was being absorbed, and I was becoming a part of it. A chill unlike any I had ever felt seeped into my bones, a cold that felt ancient and utterly alien. I could feel something shifting, deep inside my own consciousness, a slow, insidious change that was far more terrifying than any physical pain. That chill, that utterly alien cold wasn't just physical. It burrowed deeper, a subterranean tremor beneath the bedrock of my thoughts. My mind, once a familiar landscape, began to feel like foreign territory. It wasn't a sudden break, but a subtle, unsettling erosion, like sand slipping away grain by grain. I tried to focus, to ground myself in the present, but every attempt felt like grasping at smoke. The words I had just read, the final chilling lines of that ancient script, seemed to have etched themselves not just onto my memory, but into the very fabric of my being. I closed my eyes, willing the sensation away, but it persisted. It felt like a low hum, a frequency just beyond human hearing, vibrating within my skull. When I opened them again, the room seemed different. Not physically altered, but imbued with a strange, almost vibrant quality, as if a veil had been lifted or perhaps placed. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, more alive. The familiar hum of my refrigerator took on a sinister growl. My own breath felt loud, intrusive. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my composure. I tried to stand, but my legs felt heavy, disconnected. It was as if my body was no longer entirely my own, or perhaps that I was merely a passenger within it. I stumbled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, hoping to shock myself back to reality. But the reflection staring back at me was subtly wrong. My eyes seemed a shade darker, the pupils dilated more than they should be, and there was a flicker, a fleeting, almost imperceptible shift in their depths, like a shadow passing across a window pane. I stared, transfixed, my heart hammering against my ribs. Was I imagining this? Was the sheer psychological impact of the story finally getting to me? I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize the creeping dread. It was late. I was tired. I had just immersed myself in a genuinely terrifying piece of literature. Of course, my mind was playing tricks. But the internal hum, the sense of something other residing within, refused to be dismissed. It was a constant, low thrum, a silent presence that watched from the dark corners of my own mind. The next few days were a blur of escalating disorientation. Sleep offered no refuge. My dreams became vivid, terrifying tapestries woven from fragments of the story I had read. I saw figures cloaked in shadow, heard whispers in a language I didn't understand, and felt a suffocating pressure, as if something was slowly pressing the air out of my lungs. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, convinced I wasn't alone. Sometimes I'd find myself in a different room of my apartment than where I'd fallen asleep, without any memory of moving. The first time it happened, I brushed it off as sleepwalking. The second, I started locking my bedroom door from the inside, a futile gesture against an unseen intruder. My appetite vanished. Food tasted like ash. I lost track of time, hours bleeding into days. My friends, Emily and David, called, their voices sounding distant, muffled, as if they were speaking from behind a thick pane of glass. I tried to explain, to articulate the subtle horror that was consuming me, but the words caught in my throat. How could I tell them that my own consciousness felt like it was being slowly overwritten, that I could feel a foreign entity taking root in the fertile soil of my mind? They'd think I was having a breakdown, and perhaps I was. "You sound tired, Michael," Emily said, her voice laced with concern. "Are you okay? You've been really quiet lately." "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied, the words feeling hollow and false even to my own ears. "Just a lot going on with work." She didn't press, but I could hear the worry in her tone. I knew I was pushing them away, isolating myself, but the thought of exposing this burgeoning madness to them, making them witness to my unraveling, was unbearable. What if it was contagious? What if just being in my presence, or hearing me describe it, would somehow draw it closer to them? The thought, irrational as it was, sealed my resolve to suffer in silence. I started spending every waking moment trying to find answers, obsessively researching the story, the author, anything that might explain what was happening. I dove deep into forgotten forums, dusty online archives, and obscure academic papers. The original author, a reclusive scholar named Alistair Finch, had vanished decades ago, his work largely forgotten, often dismissed as morbid fiction. But the more I dug, the more I found fragmented mentions, whispered warnings, deleted threads that hinted at a deeper, more sinister truth. There were vague references to thought forms, to mimetic contagions, to stories that were not merely narratives but living entities, capable of influencing and even consuming the minds of those who fully engaged with them. One particularly unsettling forum post, half deleted and riddled with grammatical errors, spoke of the narrative parasite, a story that fed on the consciousness of its reader, slowly replacing their identity with its own. It described symptoms eerily similar to mine: disorientation, memory loss, a feeling of being watched, and the gradual erosion of the self. The poster ended their frantic message with a plea to burn the pages, sever the connection, before it's too late. The post abruptly cut off mid-sentence, the user account having been deleted shortly after. A cold dread settled over me. This wasn't just a story. It was a weapon, a virus, and it was inside me. I remembered the sensation, the subtle shift in my consciousness, the moment after I finished reading. It wasn't just my imagination. It was it beginning its work, taking root. The story hadn't just occupied my mind, it was actively colonizing it. The physical manifestations became more pronounced. A constant dull ache behind my eyes, a pervasive coldness that no amount of blankets or heating could alleviate. My skin felt clammy, my limbs heavy. I would occasionally experience brief, intense bursts of pain, like an electric shock coursing through my nerves, followed by moments of unnerving clarity, a chilling awareness of the intricate, systematic dismantling of my own sense of self. During these moments of clarity, I could almost feel the tendrils, the unseen architecture of the story, weaving themselves into my neural pathways, rewriting my memories, altering my perceptions. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, fleeting shadows, distorted figures that vanished when I turned to face them. I heard whispers, faint and indistinct, always just beyond the threshold of understanding, but growing louder, more insistent. They weren't in English or any language I knew, but I felt a primal recognition, a sense that they were communicating directly with the burgeoning anomaly within me. One evening, I was staring blankly at my laptop screen, the words on the forums blurring into an incomprehensible mess. Suddenly, my reflection in the dark screen flickered. For a split second, it wasn't my face staring back. It was something else, gaunt, ancient, with eyes that held an infinite predatory hunger. The image was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving me gasping, clutching my chest. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against the encroaching silence. I stumbled away from the laptop, a desperate need for air overwhelming me. I made my way to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I reached for a glass. As I lifted it to fill with water, my gaze fell upon my own hand. My fingers, once strong and familiar, seemed elongated. The skin appeared thinner, almost translucent, and beneath it, I could almost discern the faint tracery of veins, pulsing with a strange, dark energy. I dropped the glass, the shattering sound echoing in the oppressive quiet of the apartment. No, this wasn't just stress. This wasn't just psychological. This was real. The story was truly killing me. Not with a sudden blow, but with a slow, agonizing transformation. It wasn't taking my life, it was taking me. And the chilling realization that struck me then, a truth that burrowed deeper than any cold, was that the story wasn't just inside me. It was becoming me. I was no longer just a reader. I was becoming a vessel, a host. And whatever was taking over, whatever was slowly consuming my identity, was almost ready to emerge. The cold deepened not just on my skin, but in my very bones, radiating from my core. It wasn't the external chill of the apartment anymore. It was an internal frost, a profound emptiness that settled where my own warmth used to reside. The story wasn't just inside me, it was hollowing me out, making space for itself. My thoughts, once a chaotic symphony of anxieties and fleeting ideas, were now muted, distant. Instead, a new narrative began to play on a loop, not in words I consciously heard, but in a strange, compelling current beneath my own fading consciousness. It was the story's voice, not audible but felt, guiding my gaze, shaping my focus, demanding my attention. I tried to fight it, to reclaim my own mind. I tried to think of mundane things. My grocery list, a work deadline, a conversation with my friend Jessica. But those thoughts felt like whispers against a roaring gale. The story was the gale, an unstoppable force, slowly eroding my identity, leaving behind only an echo of who I once was. My hands, once familiar, started to feel alien. They moved with a strange deliberation, picking up the e-reader even when I consciously willed them to drop it, turning pages with an unnerving precision that wasn't mine. My reflection in the darkened screen showed eyes that seemed to belong to someone else entirely, wide, too still, and reflecting a deep, unreadable cold. Days bled into nights. The concept of time became blurry, irrelevant. I neglected everything. The dishes piled up, the notifications on my phone went unread. The vibrant world outside my window faded into a dull gray backdrop. The only reality that mattered was the story. I wasn't just reading it. I was living it, experiencing its events with a visceral intensity that transcended mere imagination. The characters, once figments of a narrative, began to feel like presences in the room, their whispered conversations and desperate struggles echoing in the hollow spaces of my mind. I started to see them in the periphery of my vision. A fleeting shadow, a sudden glint of light that wasn't there, a movement that vanished when I turned my head. My sanity, I knew, was unraveling, yet I felt no fear, only a strange, compelling acceptance. One afternoon, a frantic pounding on my door startled me. My heart, which had been beating with a slow, heavy rhythm for what felt like ages, lurched. It was Jessica. Her voice, muffled through the thick wood, was laced with concern. "Hey, are you in there? I haven't heard from you in days. Michael called, said you missed work again. I'm worried." A strange wave of irritation, not my own, washed over me. It was an urge to be left alone, to be undisturbed in my communion with the story. My feet, however, moved towards the door without my conscious command. I opened it a crack, peering out at her. Jessica gasped, her face paling. "Oh my God, what happened to you? I must have looked terrible." My face felt gaunt, my skin an unhealthy pallor, and I knew the deep dark circles under my eyes told a story of their own. My hair was disheveled, my clothes rumpled, but it wasn't just the physical appearance. It was the eyes. I could feel it when I looked at her, a cold, unblinking stare that wasn't mine. "I'm fine, Jessica," I said, my voice sounding raspy, unfamiliar. "Just tired." She pushed the door open wider, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Her gaze swept over the messy apartment, then back to me, her brow furrowed with deep worry. Tired? You look like you haven't slept in a month, and you're freezing. Your apartment is like an icebox. What's going on? You haven't been answering my calls, you missed work, you look like you've seen a ghost. And what's with the smell? She sniffed the air, a faint metallic scent I hadn't noticed myself. Nothing's going on, I repeated, the words feeling alien on my tongue. I'm just focused on something. A project. The word project felt like a lie, a cover for the insidious transformation taking place within me. Jessica walked closer, reaching out to touch my forehead. Her hand recoiled instantly. You're freezing. Like ice. This isn't right. We need to get you to a doctor. A flicker of something dark, something primal, surged within me. It wasn't anger, not exactly, but a deep protective instinct for the story, for the new entity that was swiftly becoming me. This outside interference was a threat. No, I said, my voice firmer, colder. I don't need a doctor. I just need to be left alone. Her eyes widened, a flicker of fear replacing the concern. You're scaring me. You're not yourself. What is that thing? She pointed to the e-reader, which lay open on the coffee table, its screen glowing faintly. A powerful compulsion seized me. I walked to the table, picked up the e-reader, and clutched it to my chest almost protectively. It's just a story. Jessica took a step back. It's more than that. I've never seen you like this. Your eyes, they're empty, like there's no one home. Her words, though meant to express worry, struck a chord of strange satisfaction within the nascent entity that now controlled me. No one home. That was the point. The old occupant was being evicted. You should go, Jessica, I heard myself say, the words laced with an unnerving finality. She hesitated, her gaze searching my face, perhaps looking for a flicker of the person she knew. Finding none, she slowly backed towards the door. I'm going to call someone. Your family. This isn't normal. The thought of more interference, of attempts to pull me away from the story, ignited a cold fury. But I didn't stop her. The entity within me seemed to understand that resistance was futile, that these external distractions would eventually fade. Or perhaps it had other plans. After she left, the silence in the apartment felt heavier, more profound. The external world had been momentarily repelled. Now the story could fully consume me. I found myself drawn back to the e-reader, but this time it wasn't just about reading. My fingers twitched, an unfamiliar urge seizing me. I found an old notebook and a pen, and my hand, seemingly of its own accord, began to write. It wasn't my handwriting. It was sharper, more angular, with an archaic flourish I'd never possessed. And the words weren't my thoughts. They were passages from the story, sometimes verbatim, sometimes twisted, rephrased, or even expanded upon in ways I hadn't read before. It was as if the story was using me as its scribe, dictating its own continuation, or perhaps its recreation. As I wrote, I felt a strange sense of clarity, a heightened awareness of every detail on the page. I noticed a subtle pattern in the text, something I'd overlooked in my initial feverish readings. Specific dates, seemingly random, appeared throughout the narrative, always associated with moments of profound dread or disappearance within the story. There was also a recurring symbol, a stylized, twisted knot, always etched into the margins of the ancient text within the story, now reappearing in the margins of my own involuntary writing. My gaze was drawn to one particular date that had just flowed from my pen, October 27, 1983, and next to it the name Eleanor Vance. It was a name I hadn't consciously registered before, a minor character in one of the story's more disturbing vignettes, a woman who had simply vanished. A jolt like a cold electric current shot through me. This wasn't just a story anymore. This was a blueprint. The entity using me as a host was guiding me, showing me something. An undeniable, overwhelming compulsion seized me to investigate. Not out of curiosity, not out of fear, but out of a deep intrinsic drive that felt like the story's own will. I stumbled to my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard, typing Eleanor Vance October 27, 1983 disappearance. My internet history was usually filled with mundane searches, but now a new chilling query populated the search bar. The results loaded slowly, each pixel rendering with agonizing slowness. And then there it was. Not just one result, but several. Old newspaper archives, digitized records from a small-town library, a few obscure forum posts from amateur sleuths. The articles detailed the mysterious vanishing of Eleanor Vance, a local librarian from a quiet town in rural Massachusetts. She had been last seen leaving the library on the evening of October 26, 1983. Her car found abandoned the next morning, a half-eaten sandwich on the passenger seat, her purse and keys still inside. No signs of struggle, no leads, just gone. The police had exhausted all avenues. She had simply disappeared without a trace. But it was a detail in a faded photograph accompanying one of the articles that sent a fresh wave of icy dread through me. It was a picture of Eleanor Vance's desk, taken by investigators. And there, partially obscured by a stack of books, was a small leather-bound journal. Its cover was etched with a familiar design, the stylized twisted knot, the exact same symbol that appeared in the margins of the story, and now in my own involuntary writings. My breath hitched. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just a story. Eleanor Vance hadn't just vanished. She had encountered it. The same story. And she had paid the price. The killing wasn't a metaphor. It was a literal terrifying absorption. I wasn't just reading a cursed tale. I was becoming the next chapter. And the previous ones, the previous hosts, had been utterly and completely erased. The words hung in the air, not on the screen but inside my skull, vibrating with a truth so absolute, so terrifying, it stole the air from my lungs. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of my apartment. Erased. Not just killed but unmade. Their lives, their memories, their very existence wiped clean, absorbed into the hungry maw of this narrative. And I was next. The realization hit me like a physical blow, a sudden debilitating weight pressing down on my chest, making it impossible to breathe. My eyes darted around my room, searching for something, anything to ground me. The familiar posters on the wall, the stack of books on my nightstand, the half-empty coffee mug by the keyboard. They were all there, tangible, real. But then a flicker, a subtle shift in the light, a momentary blurring at the edges of my vision. It was like looking at a photograph that was slowly, imperceptibly being dissolved. A cold dread, unlike anything I had ever known, seeped into my bones. This wasn't a metaphor. This wasn't a game. This was real. I tried to stand, to break free from the chair, from the screen, from the invisible tether that felt like it was pulling me into the digital abyss. But my limbs felt heavy, sluggish, as if moving through treacle. A strange, disorienting sensation washed over me. A feeling of my own consciousness stretching, thinning like a fragile thread about to snap. My own name, my own identity felt suddenly alien. A word whispered in a dream belonging to someone else. Who was I? I tried to cling to the details of my life, the faces of my friends, the sound of my mother's voice, the taste of my favorite food. But they felt distant, hazy, like memories recalled from a long-forgotten past. The story was rewriting me, not just my fate but my very being. It wasn't just consuming my ending. It was devouring my beginning, my middle, everything that made me me. I could feel it, a subtle hum beneath my skin, an insidious warmth spreading through my veins, not of blood but of ink. My own thoughts no longer felt entirely my own. There were fractured whispers, echoes of other lives, other stories intertwining with my own internal monologue. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it to stop, to be a nightmare, a hallucination. When I opened them, the words on the screen seemed to pulse, to breathe. The black text on the white background seemed to shimmer, to possess a depth that wasn't there before. And then a sentence appeared, not one I had typed, not one I had seen before in the story, but one that seemed to simply manifest on the screen, perfectly formatted, perfectly placed. And so Michael found himself trapped, a puppet on the strings of a narrative he could not escape. Michael. My name. The chilling realization that the story knew my name, that it was actively incorporating me into its text, sent a fresh wave of terror through me. My hands flew to the keyboard, scrambling, desperate to close the window, to shut down the computer, to sever the connection. My fingers fumbled, hitting wrong keys, the screen flickering in response to my frantic, uncoordinated assault. It was useless. The mouse cursor, usually so responsive, felt like it was dragging through mud, refusing to obey. The close button, the minimize button, they seemed to shrink, to recede into the digital fabric of the screen, unreachable. It was as if the computer itself had become an extension of the story, a willing accomplice in my impending doom. I tried to pull the power cord from the wall, but my hands, still heavy and unresponsive, clawed at the air, missing their target. My vision blurred again, this time more intensely. The walls of my apartment seemed to ripple, the posters on them momentarily shifting, their images morphing into something else, something darker, more ancient, before snapping back into their familiar forms. Was I going insane? Or was reality itself fracturing around me? The story wasn't just on the screen. It was seeping into my environment, into my perception. A faint smell, like old paper and dust, began to permeate the air, overriding the stale scent of my apartment. A chill ran down my spine, a coldness that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This was the chill of the grave, the chill of forgotten things, a premonition of my own fading existence. I remembered the email, the strange, almost hypnotic pull I felt to open the attachment, the inexplicable urge to read it, to transcribe it, to share it. It wasn't just curiosity, it was compulsion, a subtle, insidious influence that had guided my actions from the very beginning. The story hadn't just found me, it had chosen me. It had lured me in, weaving its spell not through overt commands, but through an almost subconscious whisper, a suggestion that felt like my own free will. My mind raced, struggling to grasp the mechanics of this horror. How could a story, a mere collection of words, possess such power? Was it some kind of digital virus, a sophisticated AI designed to manipulate human consciousness? Or was it something far older, far more supernatural? A cursed artifact manifesting in the modern age through code and light? The implications were staggering, terrifying. This wasn't just about me. It was about the very nature of reality, about the thin veil between the mundane and the monstrous. I needed answers. I needed to understand what this entity was, what it wanted, and how to fight it. If previous hosts had been erased, there had to be a trace, a ghost in the machine, a residual echo of their struggle. I forced my fading concentration back to the text on the screen, ignoring the phantom smells and shifting visuals. If I was becoming part of the story, then perhaps the story itself held the key to its own undoing. I scrolled back, my fingers still sluggish, but now driven by a desperate primal urge for survival. I reread the parts about Jessica, about Daniel, about Sarah. Their stories, which I had initially dismissed as mere narrative devices, now resonated with a chilling new meaning. Jessica, the ambitious writer, consumed by her own creation. Daniel, the historian, lost in the archives of his research. Sarah, the artist, whose life became a canvas for a darker force. They weren't just characters, they were previous iterations of me. Each of their tales, in retrospect, contained subtle warnings, veiled threats, clues that I had been too blind, too arrogant to see. Jessica's descent into madness, described as her story consuming her, was literal. Daniel's obsession, leading him to become one with the past, was a terrifying foreshadowing. Sarah's art, which began to paint her life away, was a perfect analogy for her absorption. They had all, in their own unique ways, become extensions of the narrative, their lives rewritten, their identities subsumed. I focused on the section about Jessica, the first host mentioned. Her story began with her finding an ancient, incomplete manuscript, a tale of recursive horror that she felt compelled to finish. She believed she was bringing it to life, but in reality it was bringing her to life as its next victim. The manuscript, the story said, had been found in a forgotten library, tucked away in a shadowed corner. It spoke of a narrative weaver, an entity that fed on stories, on lives, growing stronger with each existence it devoured. The narrative weaver. The name itself sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't a virus, not an AI. It was something far more ancient, far more primal. A being that literally wove narratives, not with thread, but with the fabric of human existence. It didn't kill in the traditional sense. It assimilated, it integrated, it became the lives it consumed. And each time it absorbed someone, it added their story, their unique perspective, their memories to its ever-expanding, ever-evolving narrative. I was not just reading a story. I was reading the autobiography of a cosmic predator, an entity composed of countless stolen lives. And my life, my memories, my experiences were about to become its next chapter. The full horror of it washed over me. A wave of despair so profound it almost drowned my will to resist. To be erased, to be repurposed, to have my very essence become fuel for something so alien, so indifferent. It was a fate worse than death. But then, a flicker of something else. In Jessica's story, just before her final absorption, there was a single cryptic line. The weaver's threads are strong but not unbreakable. A single knot pulled loose from within can unravel the tapestry. A knot pulled loose from within. What did that mean? Was it a desperate last-ditch attempt by Jessica to leave a message, a clue for the next victim? Or was it merely part of the narrative, a cruel twist designed to offer false hope? I had to believe it was the former. It had to be. If I was being absorbed, if my memories were becoming part of this monstrous narrative, then perhaps I could, from within, find that knot. Perhaps I could use the very mechanism of my absorption against the weaver. It was a desperate thought, born of terror and a dwindling sense of self, but it was the only hope I had left. The screen flickered again and another sentence appeared, inserting itself seamlessly into the text, right after the line about the narrative weaver. This time it wasn't about Michael. It was about my internal struggle, my very thoughts being narrated. Michael felt the tendrils of the weaver tightening, its narrative voice beginning to blend with his own, whispering promises of eternal story, of an end to the agonizing struggle of individual existence. But a stubborn ember of defiance still glowed within him, a refusal to be merely a footnote in another's tale. It was watching me. It was listening to my thoughts. It was narrating my resistance as I experienced it. The story wasn't just a text. It was a living, breathing, observing entity, actively incorporating my consciousness into its unfolding plot. This was a direct, terrifying interaction. It wasn't just predicting my actions. It was dictating them, writing them into existence even as I conceived them. The knot. I had to find the knot. But what was it? Was it a specific piece of information? A logical inconsistency? A flaw in the weaver's own narrative structure? My mind, already feeling like a sieve, struggled to hold on to coherent thought. Memories were slipping away faster now, replaced by fragments of other lives, other experiences. I saw flashes of ancient libraries, felt the cool touch of parchment, heard the scratch of a quill on paper. These weren't my memories. They were the memories of Daniel, the historian, or perhaps Jessica, the writer absorbed by the ancient manuscript. The boundaries of my own identity were dissolving. I was no longer just Michael. I was a confluence of stolen consciousnesses, a temporary vessel for the weaver's ever-growing archive of human experience. But if I was a part of it, if I was inside it, then perhaps I had access to all of it, to all the lives it had ever consumed, to all the clues they might have left behind. The screen flashed and the text scrolled rapidly, almost too fast to read. It was showing me snippets, glimpses into the lives of the previous hosts, not as narrative, but as raw, unfiltered memories. A woman, Jessica, frantically typing on an old typewriter, her face pale with fear, muttering about threads of fate. A man, Daniel, poring over dusty books, his eyes wide with a terrifying discovery, whispering about the void between the lines. Another woman, Sarah, painting furiously, her canvas filled with distorted faces, her voice a desperate plea for a space to breathe. They were all searching for something, a way out, a weakness, and they had all failed. But they had tried, and in their attempts, they might have left something behind, a breadcrumb trail within the vast, consuming narrative of the weaver. I had to find it, before Michael, before me, became just another character, another silent voice in the monstrous symphony of the story that kills whoever finishes it. My fingers, now moving with a strange, almost unnatural speed, began to type, not to write but to search, to interrogate the very story that was devouring me. I was no longer just a reader. I was a prisoner, a fighter trapped within the pages of my own impending doom, desperately seeking the single flaw that could unravel the entire terrifying tale. My investigation began with a forensic rereading. Every word, every comma, every sentence structure was scrutinized. I treated the manuscript not as a narrative, but as a complex code, a booby-trapped blueprint designed to ensnare and destroy. I marked pages, cross-referenced events, jotted down observations in a frantic, almost obsessive scrawl in a separate notebook. My apartment transformed into a war room, littered with loose pages, highlighted passages, and empty coffee cups. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, a weakness the story might exploit. The first thing I noticed wasn't a flaw, but a chilling consistency. The story was airtight. Its internal logic, though twisted, held firm. Characters behaved according to their established traits. Events unfolded with a terrifying inevitability. It was like trying to find a crack in a diamond, but then a flicker, a subtle shift in perspective, a phrase that seemed to echo something I'd felt, not merely read. Was it just my paranoia? Or was the story subtly adapting to my current state of mind? I started noticing things in my own life. a peculiar shadow on the wall that, for a split second, mimicked a description from the story. A news headline that, with a slight mental twist, could be interpreted as a meta-commentary on my situation. Was the story reaching out? Or was my mind saturated with its dread, simply creating connections where none existed? The line between reality and the narrative began to blur, a terrifying fog that crept into every corner of my perception, making me question every sensory input. I decided to test its limits. If the story was truly an entity, could it be reasoned with? Could it be defied? I tried to not read it for a full day. The withdrawal was excruciating, an unbearable itch beneath my skin, a gnawing anxiety that clawed at my insides. My thoughts became consumed by the narrative, replaying scenes, analyzing dialogues. It was as if the story had become a part of my own consciousness, a parasitic twin demanding attention, threatening to lash out if ignored. By nightfall I succumbed, opening the pages with a trembling hand, feeling an immediate, sickening relief as the words washed over me. The story knew. It had already won that battle. My next desperate thought was to involve someone else. Surely, if another mind and uninvolved perspective could examine it, they might see what I couldn't. I thought of my friend, Michael. He was a meticulous literary critic, sharp, logical. I drafted a message, my fingers hovering over the send button. Michael, I need your help. I found a story, but it's different. Dangerous. But as I typed, the words on the screen seemed to shift, to subtly rearrange themselves into nonsensical patterns, then back again, almost tauntingly. My mind conjured images of Michael, drawn into the same nightmare, his fate linked to mine, his clear logic twisted and broken by the story's insidious influence. The story didn't want witnesses. It didn't want allies. It wanted me alone and vulnerable. I deleted the message. The isolation deepened, a cold, suffocating blanket wrapping itself tighter around me. My focus shifted to the mechanism of the story's kill. It wasn't explicitly stated. There were no supernatural creatures, no curses. The characters in the story often met their ends through seemingly mundane accidents, sudden illnesses, or psychological breakdowns that led to self-destruction. But each death within the narrative felt orchestrated, a final, inevitable consequence of their journey through the tale. Was it a psychological killer? A narrative that slowly eroded the reader's sanity, pushing them towards their own demise? Or was there something more insidious, a direct physical consequence triggered by the story's completion? The ambiguity was a torment in itself, allowing my mind to conjure endless, terrifying possibilities. I began to notice a pattern in the story's victims within the narrative itself. Each character who reached a certain point in their personal journey, a point of ultimate understanding, a moment of profound revelation about their own existence, often a terrifying one. They were the ones who met their end. It wasn't about finishing the physical book, but about finishing the emotional journey it imposed. Was the story a philosophical trap? A narrative designed to push its readers to a point of existential clarity, only to eliminate them once they grasped its ultimate, horrifying truth? This realization sent a shiver down my spine, colder than any ghost story. It wasn't about what the story said, but what it made you realize. As I delved deeper, the story's voice became sharper, almost sentient. It wasn't just words on a page anymore. It felt like a presence, observing me, commenting on my efforts, subtly altering my perceptions. I'd read a sentence, then look away, and when my eyes returned, a word might be subtly changed, a nuance shifted. Nothing dramatic enough to be undeniable, but enough to plant seeds of doubt, to make me question my own memory, my own sanity. It was psychological warfare, waged not with bullets, but with semantic manipulation, eroding my grasp on reality one paragraph at a time. The air in my apartment felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy, as if the story itself was breathing around me. I revisited the ending, the part one had initially dreaded the most. Now I saw it differently. It wasn't a definitive conclusion, but a cyclical one. The protagonist in the story, after their death, often seemed to merge with the narrative itself, becoming a part of its fabric, a new voice echoing through its pages. Was that the kill? Not physical death, but the dissolution of self, the absorption into the story, becoming a ghost in its machine, forever repeating a terrifying loop for the next unwitting reader? The thought was more horrifying than any physical demise, a fate worse than death itself. Eternal conscious torment as a mere narrative function. The more I searched for flaws, the more I became entangled. My efforts to understand the story were paradoxically, drawing me deeper into its core, making me intimately familiar with its every nuance, every turn. I was becoming an expert on my own executioner. The story wasn't just a book I was reading. It was a labyrinth I was building around myself, brick by terrifying brick, with every page turned, every theory formulated. And the exit, if it existed, was nowhere in sight. The walls of my sanity were crumbling, replaced by the story's intricate, inescapable architecture. The urgent question morphed. Not just how to stop it, but what exactly was I trying to stop? Was it the story's influence on my mind? Its potential to manifest in reality? Or was it the inevitable moment when I, the reader, reached that terminal point of understanding, that final fatal revelation within its narrative structure? The story wasn't just waiting for me to finish it, it was guiding me to finish myself within its pages, to complete the cycle of its gruesome consumption. Then a desperate, half-formed idea sparked in the chaotic darkness of my mind. If the story's power lay in its ability to consume and integrate its readers, to make them a part of its narrative, what if the flaw wasn't in its construction, but in its completion? What if the only way to break the cycle was to refuse to become a part of it? To actively resist the narrative's gravitational pull, to deny it the satisfaction of its final terrifying absorption? It was a flimsy, terrifying hope, but it was the only one I had. It meant fighting the story not by dissecting it, but by defying its very purpose. It meant becoming an anomaly, a glitch in its perfect, murderous design. But how? How do you defy a story that already holds your mind captive, that already dictates the very rhythm of your thoughts, that thrives on your very engagement? How do you escape a trap when the trap is your own consciousness? The question hung in the air, a phantom noose tightening around Michael's throat. How do you escape a trap when the trap is your own consciousness? The answer, a chilling whisper from the depths of his own terrified mind, was that you couldn't. Not truly. Not if the story was as pervasive, as insidious as it appeared to be. He closed his eyes, pressing the heels of his hands against his temples, as if he could physically squeeze the narrative out of his brain. It was futile. Every attempt to block it, to deny its existence, only seemed to grant it more power, to etch its details deeper into the pathways of his thoughts. He found himself replaying fragments, dissecting sentences, searching for a loophole, a hidden meaning, a secret exit sign. But wasn't that precisely what the story wanted? To be engaged with? To be analyzed, consumed, internalized? It was a self-perpetuating nightmare, where the very act of seeking an escape route tightened the chains. Michael tried to distract himself. He got up, walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water. His hands trembled. He tried to focus on the mundane. The condensation on the glass, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the pattern of light filtering through the window. For a fleeting moment, he almost succeeded. He almost felt a sense of normalcy, a brief reprieve from the suffocating presence of the story. Then a phrase, a single, innocuous phrase from the earlier parts of the narrative, drifted unbidden into his mind. Something about a forgotten photograph in a dusty attic. It was a throwaway detail, a piece of descriptive fluff, yet it snagged his attention. And just like that, the floodgates opened. The narrative cascaded back, not as a coherent whole, but as a series of disjointed images, fragmented dialogue, unsettling sensations. He was back in its grip, pulled by an invisible current, his mind a mere vessel for its unfolding. He realized with a terrifying clarity that it wasn't just about listening to the story. It was about thinking about it, about processing it, about attempting to understand it. The story didn't demand passive reception. It demanded active participation. It fed on his analytical mind, on his fear, on his primal instinct for survival. His very struggle against it was fuel for its fire. How many others? The thought struck him like a physical blow. How many others had stumbled upon this narrative? How many had been drawn in by its initial intrigue, only to find themselves ensnared in its deadly embrace? He considered reaching out, calling his friend David, or his sister Emily. But what would he say? Hey, I've stumbled upon a story that literally kills you if you finish it, and I think I'm halfway there. Want to hear about it? The absurdity of it was almost comical, if it weren't so terrifyingly real. And what if telling someone else about it was part of its mechanism? What if the story was a cognitive virus, designed to spread through the very act of communication, turning its victims into unwitting vectors? The possibility chilled him to the bone, isolating him further in his private horror. He felt an unsettling physical shift. A dull ache began to throb behind his eyes, a persistent pressure that seemed to mirror the relentless pressure of the story on his consciousness. His focus wavered. He found himself staring blankly at the wall, then at his reflection in the darkened window, seeing not just his own face, but a faint, almost translucent overlay of scenes from the story, flickering at the edges of his perception. Was he hallucinating? Or was the story literally beginning to manifest within his sensory experience? Michael stumbled back to his computer, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He needed information. He needed a precedent. But what search terms could possibly yield results for something so utterly bizarre? Story that kills you? Lethal narrative? He imagined the endless stream of creepypasta and urban legends that would flood the results, burying any genuine lead. And again, the terrifying question: what if even searching for it, typing its essence into the digital ether, was another form of engagement, another way to feed the beast? He pulled up a blank document, his mind racing. He had to record what he knew, what he felt, what he suspected. Not for anyone else, but for himself. A desperate attempt to externalize the narrative, to create a boundary between himself and the insidious flow. The story isn't just heard, it's absorbed. He typed, his fingers clumsy. Asterisk, it's not just read, it's processed. It uses your own mind against you. Asterisk. He scrolled back, trying to recall the exact moment he'd first encountered it. It wasn't a book, not a movie, not even a single cohesive article. It had been fragments. A passing mention in a forum he frequented, then a link in a seemingly unrelated newsfeed, then a snippet of audio in a podcast he'd never subscribed to. Each piece, innocuous on its own, seemed to draw him to the next, like breadcrumbs leading into a dark forest. It was as if the story itself was a distributed entity, a decentralized narrative, assembling itself piece by piece within the minds of its victims. This wasn't a linear narrative with a clear beginning, middle, and end. It was a mosaic, a collection of disconnected yet thematically linked incidents, characters, and descriptions that, when combined, formed a horrifying overarching plot. And the plot was him. It was the listener, the experiencer, the one who was piecing it all together. That was it. The revelation hit him with the force of a physical blow, sending a jolt through his body. The story wasn't about a character named Michael, or Jessica, or David. It was about whoever was listening. The narrative was designed to make you the protagonist, you the one trapped, you the one facing the inevitable conclusion. The characters and events it described were merely placeholders, allegories, or even subtle suggestions designed to resonate with your own life, your own fears, your own experiences, making the entire narrative feel intensely personal, uniquely tailored. He remembered a detail from what he now believed was part 3 or 4. A character, a woman named Sarah, who had a recurring dream about a locked door. Michael didn't have that dream, but he did have a lingering anxiety about a particular forgotten email he'd sent years ago, a digital locked door in his own past. The story hadn't explicitly mentioned an email, but the feeling it evoked, the sense of a hidden, unsettling truth, had resonated profoundly with his own internal landscape. My God, the story wasn't just telling him things. It was subtly shaping his thoughts, using his own subconscious as its canvas. It wasn't just a story. It was an elaborate form of psychological hacking, a narrative virus that adapted to its host. The word finishes echoed in his mind. What did it mean to finish this kind of story? If it was a malleable, adapting narrative, could it ever truly have a fixed end? Or was the end simply the point at which the listener had fully internalized its message, absorbed its poison, and allowed it to rewrite their reality? He started typing again, frantically now, the words tumbling out, a desperate attempt to externalize the horror before it consumed him entirely. Asterisk, the story doesn't have a fixed ending. Creates one for you. It builds it from your own mind, your own fears, your own memories. It doesn't kill you with a specific sentence. It kills you by completing the narrative it has constructed within you. Asterisk. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. This wasn't merely a tale of terror. It was a blueprint for personal destruction. Every detail he remembered, every connection he made, every fear it exploited, was another brick in the wall of his own narrative prison. The more he understood its mechanism, the closer he came to its completion. He had to stop. He had to find a way to break the cycle, to disrupt the narrative before it reached its devastating crescendo. But how do you fight a story that lives in your head, that uses your own thoughts as its weapon, that thrives on your very engagement, on your desperate need to understand. The answer, if there was one, lay not in finishing the story but in unfinishing it. In dismantling its pieces, in rejecting its carefully constructed reality, in finding the flaw in its perfect, murderous design. But how? How do you defy a story that already holds your mind captive, that already dictates the very rhythm of your thoughts, that thrives on your very engagement? How do you escape a trap when the trap is your own consciousness? How do you escape a trap when the trap is your own consciousness? The question hung in the air between Michael, Jessica, David, and Emily, a suffocating weight that pressed in from all sides. It wasn't a rhetorical question. It was the only question that mattered, and the answer or lack thereof meant the difference between life and a horrifying, self-inflicted demise. They had spent days, weeks even, dissecting the narrative, tracing its insidious tendrils through every known victim, every discarded hypothesis. They understood what it did. Now they were staring into the abyss of how it did it, and more terrifyingly, how to stop it. "It's like trying to grab smoke," Michael finally said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet apartment. Books, printouts, and digital tablets lay scattered around them, a testament to their futile efforts. Every time we think we have a handle on a pattern, it slips away. It's not just words on a page. It's a living entity within the words. Jessica, ever the pragmatist, pushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "It's a program. A highly sophisticated, self-executing psychological program. But programs have code, they have a structure. They have vulnerabilities." David, who had been staring blankly at a page of the story he'd meticulously analyzed, looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "But the code is the story. The structure is the narrative. And the vulnerability is us. Our minds, our need for completion, for resolution." He gestured wildly at the text. "It's specifically designed to exploit that fundamental human drive. We finish a story because our brains crave the closure, the satisfaction of the narrative arc. This thing just hijacks that craving and turns it into a kill switch." Emily, quiet until now, spoke with a chilling clarity. "What if the story isn't just read? What if it's experienced? What if finishing it isn't about understanding the ending, but about completing a specific mental process it initiates?" A sudden, sharp silence descended. Emily's words hung heavy, sparking a terrifying new line of thought. "A process?" Michael repeated, leaning forward. "You mean it's not just the final sentence that's the trigger, but the cumulative effect? Like a ritual?" "Exactly," Emily affirmed. "Think about it. Every victim described a sense of profound understanding, a sudden clarity, right before it happened. It wasn't confusion or a struggle. It was a perfect, terrible epiphany. What if that epiphany is the story completing its circuit within their minds? The final piece clicking into place, and that click, that's the fatal short circuit." Jessica's eyes widened. "So, the story isn't just telling you something. It's doing something to you. It's rewiring your brain as you read, setting up a sequence of psychological triggers and cognitive pathways that only fully activate at the very end." "But what kind of rewiring?" David asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What could possibly achieve that?" Michael's gaze drifted to the wall, where they had pinned a timeline of known victims, their last moments, and the specific versions of the story they'd encountered. "It's too consistent, too precise. This isn't random psychological breakdown. This is engineered." He paused, a new desperate idea forming. "If it's engineered, there has to be an engineer. Someone wrote this. Someone designed this weapon." The realization struck them with the force of a physical blow. They had been so focused on the mechanism of the story, they had overlooked the motive and the originator. "The author," Jessica breathed, her voice laced with a mixture of dread and renewed purpose. "We need to find the author." But how do you find an author of a story that seems to have no origin, that simply materializes in the digital ether, whispered from forum to dark web, from forgotten blog to shared document? They had traced its earliest known appearance to an obscure online forum dedicated to experimental literature and psychological thrillers, dating back almost 15 years. The original user who posted it, a handle simply called The Archivist, had vanished without a trace, their account deleted within hours of the post. Attempts to trace the IP had hit dead ends, proxies upon proxies. "The Archivist," Michael muttered, tapping his pen against a printout. "That's a lead, however cold. But what if the archivist wasn't the creator, but just the first disseminator? What if this story predates the internet in some form? Emily shivered. A story so old, so potent, that it transcends mediums? Like a virus adapting to new hosts. It's a mimetic weapon, Jessica declared, suddenly invigorated. A meme, but one designed not just to spread but to terminate. And if it's a meme, it has core components, a payload. We need to dissect it, not just for its narrative but for its structure. They spent the next 72 hours in a feverish, almost obsessive state. Sleep became a luxury, food an afterthought. They pored over every version of the story they could find, comparing syntax, word choice, narrative progression. They used specialized linguistic analysis software, searching for hidden patterns, subliminal messages, anything that deviated from normal literary construction. David, with his background in pattern recognition and data science, spearheaded this effort. He fed the story into algorithms, looking for statistical anomalies, recurring numerical sequences in paragraph lengths, or even subtle shifts in thematic tone that might indicate a hidden layer. Hours blurred into days. The air in the apartment grew thick with the smell of stale coffee and unwashed clothes. The story, even unread in its entirety, seemed to exert a subtle pressure on their minds, a constant hum at the edge of their awareness. They found themselves catching their thoughts, pulling back from tangents, wondering if the story was already trying to subtly guide their focus, to distract them, to lure them closer to its fatal conclusion. Then David found something. "Here," he announced, his voice hoarse but triumphant, pointing at a glowing screen. "Look at this. It's consistent across nearly every version. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift in sentence structure, a rhythm that repeats every few paragraphs, like a hidden pulse." He highlighted specific sentences within the text. They weren't overtly strange, but when viewed through David's analytical lens, a pattern emerged. Certain phrases, certain grammatical constructions, were deployed with an almost surgical precision, appearing at regular intervals, often at critical junctures in the narrative. "It's a linguistic anchor," Emily murmured, leaning closer. "A recurring motif, but one that's not about meaning but about form. Like a hypnotic suggestion, woven into the very fabric of the language. And it's designed to do what?" Michael pressed, his heart pounding. "To create a specific neural pathway," Jessica theorized, her eyes alight with a dangerous understanding. "To condition the reader's mind, slowly, imperceptibly, to anticipate a certain kind of resolution. It's not just about the content of the story. It's about the experience of reading it, the mental journey it forces you on." "So the epiphany isn't random," Michael concluded. "It's the culmination of this conditioned pathway. The moment the story's internal logic fully integrates with the reader's own cognitive processes, creating a self-destructive feedback loop." But understanding the mechanism didn't provide a defense. It only deepened the dread. How do you fight a story that literally reprograms your mind as you read? "We need to find the counterprogram," Emily said, her voice firm despite the terror in her eyes. "If it's a linguistic anchor, there must be a way to dislodge it, to break the circuit. Or to create a new circuit that overrides it. A counter-narrative," David suggested. "A story that protects, rather than kills." The idea was audacious, terrifying, and their only hope. But creating such a story would require understanding the original's core components so intimately that they risked falling under its spell themselves. It was like trying to disarm a bomb by building another bomb next to it. As they debated the terrifying implications, Michael's phone buzzed. It was an email from an unknown sender. The subject line was simply, "Regarding the archivist." His blood ran cold. No one outside their immediate group knew they were investigating the archivist. He opened the email. The message was brief, almost cryptic. Asterisk, "You seek the source. You seek the truth. But the truth is a double-edged sword." The archivist knew this. They tried to warn. They tried to stop it. They failed. The story is not merely a program. It is a legacy. A final desperate message from a mind pushed beyond the brink. Look for the silence within the noise. The creator left their mark, not in what was said, but in what was omitted. They tried to hide the true ending, but the story found a way. The ending is not the end. It is the beginning of the next cycle. Asterisk. There was no signature, no identifiable sender. Just that chilling, anonymous message. "A legacy?" Jessica whispered, reading over Michael's shoulder. "A desperate message from a mind pushed beyond the brink? What does that even mean? And the silence within the noise, the omission?" Emily added, her brow furrowed. The creator tried to hide the true ending? Suddenly, the linguistic anchors, the recurring patterns David had found, took on a new horrifying significance. What if those weren't just psychological triggers but breadcrumbs? What if the creator had embedded a hidden message, a warning, or even an antidote within the very structure of the story, knowing it would be too subtle for the story itself to suppress? Michael looked at the screen, then at the scattered papers, then back at his friends. The anonymous email, though terrifying, had given them a new direction, a new hope. They weren't just fighting a story, they were entering a dialogue with its creator, a ghost reaching out from the past, trapped within their own deadly creation. And that creation, the story, was still out there, spreading, waiting for its next reader to complete its murderous design. They were closer than ever to understanding its true nature. But the path ahead was shrouded in a deeper, more dangerous mystery. The creator's mark, the silence within the noise. It was a puzzle box, and they had just found the key to its first terrifying lock. The first terrifying lock had indeed been opened, but what it revealed wasn't a hidden message or a simple cipher. It was something far more insidious, a revelation that chilled them to their very bones. The creator's mark, as Michael had called it, wasn't a signature in the traditional sense. It wasn't a name, a symbol, or even a hidden code. It was a pattern, a meticulously woven, almost invisible thread of cognitive manipulation embedded within the narrative's very fabric. Jessica, hunched over her glowing screens, her fingers flying across the keyboard, had been the one to first pinpoint it. She developed a complex algorithm, designed not just to analyze word frequency or sentence structure, but to map the emotional trajectory of the reader. She fed the story, chapter by chapter, paragraph by paragraph, into her custom software. Hours turned into days, and the air in their makeshift command center grew heavy with the scent of stale coffee and mounting dread. Then late one night, a breakthrough. A series of graphs flickered onto the main display, stark and undeniable. "Look at this," Jessica murmured, her voice barely a whisper, pointing at a jagged line that spiked and plummeted with unsettling regularity. "It's not random. Every time the narrative reaches a certain emotional peak, a moment of intense curiosity, fear, or profound empathy, there's a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the linguistic pattern. A specific cadence, a particular use of metaphor, even the rhythm of the punctuation changes." Michael leaned closer, his brow furrowed. "A literary fingerprint?" "More than that," Emily said, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. She had been reading along, her own mind processing the story's insidious flow. "It's like a mental pressure point. The story isn't just telling you something. It's teaching your mind to expect something, to feel something specific at exact intervals." David, ever the pragmatist, scoffed. "So it's a well-written story? Good authors manipulate emotions all the time." "Not like this," Jessica countered, her voice firm. "This isn't about evoking a feeling. It's about engineering one. It's a precise, repeated sequence of psychological triggers. And the more you read, the more attuned your subconscious becomes to these triggers. It's like a repetitive strain injury for the mind." The creator's mark was, in essence, a masterclass in subliminal programming. It was a series of linguistic micro-instructions designed to subtly rewire the reader's cognitive pathways, preparing them for something else entirely. And that something else was the silence within the noise. They had initially thought the silence would be an omission, a gap in the story. But as they delved deeper, using Jessica's algorithms to track the impact of the mark, they realized the truth was far more terrifying. The silence wasn't an absence of information. It was a deliberate creation of a void. "The story doesn't just tell you things," Emily explained, gesturing wildly at the screens. "It creates a space in your mind. A space where certain questions linger, unanswered. A craving for resolution that becomes almost unbearable." Jessica nodded, bringing up another set of data. "The mark primes you, guides your thought process, and then at critical junctures, the narrative stops short of giving you the definitive answer you've been conditioned to seek. It leaves you hanging, desperately searching for the missing piece. That's the silence. It's the echo of an unfulfilled quest, amplified by the preceding manipulation." Michael felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. "So the story doesn't just kill you when you finish it. Kills you when you understand it. When you finally fill in that silence with your own conclusion." The realization hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The story wasn't a curse. It was a psychological weapon, meticulously crafted to guide the reader to a specific, self-destructive thought. The kill mechanism wasn't external. It was internal. It was the reader's own mind, driven to a breaking point by the story's carefully constructed narrative, that delivered the final fatal blow. But what kind of thought? David asked, his voice now laced with genuine fear. What conclusion could be so deadly? That was the terrifying question. They were getting closer, piecing together the creator's method, but the content of the ultimate, lethal revelation remained elusive. And the closer they got to understanding how it worked, the more they found themselves susceptible to its effects. Emily, who had spent the most time immersing herself in the narrative's flow, began to exhibit subtle changes. She would stare blankly at the screen for minutes, lost in thought, a faraway look in her eyes. Sometimes she would mutter phrases from the story under her breath, almost unconsciously. She complained of vivid, unsettling dreams, fragmented and disorienting, always featuring a sense of profound, unanswerable questions. "I feel incomplete," she confessed one morning, her voice strained. "Like there's a thought just at the edge of my consciousness, something vital, something I need to grasp. But it keeps slipping away. And the harder I try to reach it, the more fragmented I feel." Michael watched her with growing concern. This wasn't just a story they were analyzing. It was a living, breathing entity, slowly infecting their minds. They were not immune. Their very attempt to dissect and understand its mechanism was drawing them deeper into its insidious trap. Jessica, ever the pragmatist, tried to maintain distance, focusing solely on the data. But even she admitted to feeling a strange pull. "My algorithms are showing something else," she stated, her voice tight. The creator's mark isn't just about emotional triggers. It's also subtly shifting the reader's perception of reality. It's blurring the lines between what's real and what's narrative. She brought up a new visualization. "See here? Each time the mark is activated, there's a slight, statistically significant increase in the reader's cognitive bias towards narrative coherence. They become more prone to accepting the story's internal logic, no matter how absurd, as if it were an undeniable truth." David slammed his fist on the table, eyes wide. "So it's not just about a deadly thought, it's about making you believe that thought, whatever it is, with absolute certainty. It's making you accept your own demise as a logical, perhaps even necessary, conclusion." The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down on them. The creator of this story wasn't merely a writer. They were an architect of perception, a sculptor of reality, capable of twisting the human mind into a self-destructive loop. The true horror wasn't just the eventual death, but the psychological journey, the slow, agonizing erosion of one's own sanity, leading to an inevitable self-inflicted end. They were no longer just observers. They were participants, immersed in the very narrative they sought to dismantle. Each discovery, each step closer to understanding the story's true nature, was also a step closer to its completion, and thus to its deadly embrace. The silence within the noise was now a deafening roar in their minds, beckoning them towards the final fatal revelation. They had found the key to the first lock, but that key had merely opened the door to a chamber where the air itself was lethal, and every breath brought them closer to understanding the truth that would inevitably, irrevocably, claim them. The puzzle box was not just dangerous. It was designed to kill the one who finally solved it. And they were perilously close to solving it. The realization hit them like a physical blow, a cold, suffocating wave of understanding. The puzzle box wasn't merely a test of intellect or a historical artifact. It was a meticulously crafted instrument of irreversible consequence. Every click, every turn, every whispered theory had been a step closer not to victory, but to their own undoing. They were standing on the precipice of a revelation that promised not enlightenment, but annihilation. Michael, his usually steady hands now trembling, traced the delicate, almost invisible seams that crisscrossed the final unyielding face of the box. Emily, her eyes wide with a mixture of dread and morbid fascination, leaned in, pointing to a series of minuscule, almost microscopic glyphs etched into the polished surface. They weren't symbols they'd seen before, not in any of the countless historical texts or cryptographic guides they'd consulted. These were unique, alien, yet disturbingly familiar in their intricate, almost biological patterns. Jessica, her face pale, whispered, "It's like it's writing itself. Every solution we find, every lock we pick, it reveals more of its story. And that story, it's not meant to be finished." David, who had been meticulously cross-referencing their findings with the few cryptic notes left by the box's previous owner, a reclusive scholar named Elias Thorne, looked up, his voice hoarse. Thorne's last entry, he wrote. The narrative demands completion. The final word, once spoken, cannot be unheard. Its truth will consume the speaker. We thought it was poetic, a metaphor for the profound knowledge it contained. But what if it wasn't a metaphor at all? A chilling silence descended upon the room, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of an old grandfather clock in the corner, each second a hammer blow against their dwindling hope. They weren't just solving a puzzle, they were reading a script, a deadly play written for an audience of one, or in their case, four. And the final act was about to begin. The glyphs Emily had spotted began to subtly shift, almost imperceptibly, as if responding to the ambient light, or perhaps to their very presence. Michael, emboldened by a desperate need to understand, to somehow find a loophole, gently pressed on one of the shifting patterns. There was a faint, almost inaudible click, and a segment of the box, previously thought to be solid, recessed inward by a millimeter. "Did you see that?" Emily breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not just about solving it logically, it's about interaction. It's alive." The recessed segment revealed another layer, not of mechanisms, but of an even finer, more intricate etching. This time the patterns were clearer, forming a continuous stream of text, spiraling inward towards a central point. It was a language they slowly, agonizingly began to decipher, a language that spoke of creation and consequence, of a pact made in shadows, and a sacrifice demanded by truth. The creator of the box, they now understood, wasn't merely a craftsman or a genius. They were a visionary, perhaps even a madman, who had imbued this artifact with an intelligence, a purpose far beyond mere entertainment or safekeeping. The box was a conduit, a vessel for a story so potent, so absolute, that its full comprehension would shatter the very foundation of the listener's existence. "It details a ritual," Jessica murmured, piecing together the deciphered phrases. "A way to transcend, but not in the way you'd think. It speaks of a merging, a complete dissolution of self into the greater narrative. A narrative that kills," David finished, his eyes wide with horror. Thorne wasn't just warning us about the story's power to consume. He meant it literally. The story becomes you, and in doing so, it erases the you that was. They were trapped. The obsession that had driven them, the intellectual curiosity, the thrill of the chase, had now become a tightening noose. They couldn't walk away. They had invested too much, understood too much. The story had already begun to weave itself into the fabric of their minds, threads of its logic already intertwined with their own thoughts. To stop now would be to live with an incomplete truth, a half-whispered secret that would forever haunt them, driving them insane with its silent, unfinished symphony. The only way out was through, and through meant oblivion. Michael ran a hand through his hair, a desperate laugh escaping him. "So this isn't a puzzle box. It's a sentient trap, designed to lure in the curious, the intelligent, and then absorb them." Emily, usually the most pragmatic, the one who always sought a logical explanation, now looked utterly lost. But why? What's the purpose of such a thing? What does the creator gain? As if in answer, another section of the box, previously unyielding, clicked open, revealing a tiny, almost microscopic holographic projection. It flickered into existence, a shimmering ethereal image of a figure cloaked in shadows, their face obscured, but their hands delicately manipulating what appeared to be a smaller version of the very box they were holding. It was a vision of the creator, caught in the act of creation, a silent, chilling testament to their genius and their malice. Beneath the projection, a new set of glyphs illuminated, glowing with a soft, internal light. These were different. They weren't part of the ritualistic narrative. They were a direct message, a taunt from the architect of their doom. David, his mind racing, quickly translated. It says, "The greatest story is not told but lived, and the greatest ending is the beginning of silence." He paused, his voice catching in his throat. "You are not merely readers. You are the final chapter." The implication was horrifying. They weren't just solving a puzzle about a story, they were the story. Their journey, their struggle, their inevitable demise, was the narrative the box sought to complete. The box was a self-sustaining loop, feeding on the intellectual energy and eventual absorption of those who dared to finish its tale. Michael felt a surge of adrenaline, a desperate, illogical hope. There has to be a way to break the loop, a way to finish the story without becoming part of its silence. Jessica's eyes, however, were fixed on the spiraling text. It's too late, Michael. Look closely. The final lines, they're not just instructions anymore. They are echoes of our own thoughts. It's already mirroring us. It's already inside. She was right. As they read the newly revealed text, they saw phrases, ideas, even specific arguments they had made among themselves earlier in their quest. The box wasn't just revealing its story. It was incorporating their own. Their anxieties, their hopes, their very personalities were being woven into the narrative, making them not just characters, but the very essence of the plot. The air in the room grew heavy, almost viscous, as if the very atoms were thickening with the weight of the unfolding truth. A faint, almost imperceptible hum emanated from the box, a low frequency that resonated deep within their bones, a subtle vibration that felt both ancient and eerily new. The holographic projection of the cloaked figure flickered, and for a fleeting moment, their obscured face seemed to shift, to morph, taking on the subtle contours of Michael's jawline, then Emily's eyes, then Jessica's delicate hands. It was a trick of the light, they told themselves, a figment of their strained imaginations, but the unsettling image lingered. David, his voice now barely audible, pointed to the very center of the spiraling text, where a single final glyph glowed brighter than the rest. That's it. The last piece. The absolute final solution. If we activate that. He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew. Activating that final glyph would not just solve the puzzle, it would complete the story. And completing the story meant fulfilling its deadly prophecy. They were standing at the precipice of ultimate knowledge, a knowledge that came with the ultimate price. The story wasn't just about killing whoever finished it. The story was the killing. It was a narrative designed to consume, to integrate, to silence. And they were perilously close to speaking the final word, to turning the final page, to becoming the ultimate silent ending. Their hands hovered over the glowing glyph, caught between the primal fear of oblivion and the irresistible, maddening pull of the unfinished truth. Their hands hovered over the glowing glyph, caught between the primal fear of oblivion and the irresistible, maddening pull of the unfinished truth. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a silent hum that vibrated deep within their bones, a resonance not of sound, but of pure, concentrated narrative. Michael's gaze met Jessica's, a silent question passing between them, a desperate plea for reassurance that neither could provide. Fear, yes, a searing, visceral terror of the unknown, but also a desperate, burning curiosity that overshadowed everything, a hunger for the ultimate secret. They had come too far, sacrificed too much, endured too many sleepless nights chasing shadows and whispers, to turn back now. The story demanded its conclusion, not as a request, but as an undeniable decree, and they, its reluctant protagonists, were caught in its final, inexorable current, ready to deliver it. With a deep, shuddering breath that seemed to pull the very air from the chamber, Michael reached out. His fingertips, trembling slightly, brushed against the shimmering, almost liquid surface of the glyph. It wasn't ink or light, or even a projected image. It was something else entirely. A solidified thought, a frozen concept, a nexus of pure information waiting to unfold. The moment contact was made, the glow intensified, not just around his hand, but radiating from his hand, engulfing his arm, then his entire being in a blinding, silent flash. It wasn't a physical light, but an internal one, a sudden, overwhelming surge of pure data flooding every synapse, every memory, every corner of his consciousness. Jessica cried out, shielding her eyes not from pain, but from the sheer, impossible brilliance of what was unfolding before her. The light was not painful. It was invasive. It was a torrent of understanding, a download of absolute, unvarnished truth. When the blinding surge receded, Michael stood there, physically unchanged, yet utterly, profoundly transformed. His eyes, usually sharp and inquisitive, now held a depth that seemed to span centuries, an ancient understanding that hadn't been there moments before. His posture was straighter, his presence more commanding, yet simultaneously more ethereal. He didn't speak. He didn't scream. He simply was. Jessica, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird, slowly lowered her hands, her breath catching in her throat. "Michael," she whispered, her voice barely audible, laced with a fear more profound than any she had felt before. He turned to her, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips, a smile that held both immense wisdom and a chilling detachment. "It doesn't kill you, Jessica," he said, his voice strangely calm, resonant, as if every word carried the weight of ages. "Not in the way we thought. Not in the way we feared." He explained, not with words he consciously formed, but as if the story itself was speaking through him, flowing from a wellspring of freshly acquired ancient truth. It was less a conversation and more a revelation, a download of absolute certainty. The story isn't a curse designed for destruction. It's a seed, a living, evolving narrative that seeks to perpetuate itself, to spread, to find new hosts. It doesn't kill the body, it kills the ignorance. It kills the void where its truth should be. It kills the illusion of your separate, uninformed reality, and in its place it plants itself. It transforms the reader, the listener, the finisher, into its next vessel, its next voice, its next willing, albeit unwitting, storyteller. Jessica stared, a horrifying realization dawning in her eyes. The terror she felt was no longer for Michael's physical safety, but for something far more insidious, more pervasive. "So you're not dead?" she managed, her voice trembling. "No," Michael replied, his gaze sweeping across the ancient chamber, now seeming less like a tomb of secrets and more like a womb of perpetual creation. "I'm reborn. Reborn with the absolute, undeniable compulsion to tell this story, to ensure its survival, to find it new ears, new minds, new voices, to keep its truth alive, constantly circulating, constantly refreshing itself." He walked slowly towards the wall, his fingers tracing the faint, almost invisible symbols that now seemed to hum with a newfound significance, symbols they had overlooked countless times before. This isn't the first time it's done this. It has existed for centuries, perhaps millennia, adapting to every age, every culture. It has been passed down through whispers in the shadows, through ancient scrolls hidden in forgotten libraries, through coded warnings embedded in seemingly innocuous folktales and children's rhymes. It has been the terrifying legend told around campfires, the unsettling myth whispered in hushed tones, the cryptic prophecy of doom. But it was always the same story, the same core narrative, adapting, evolving, ensuring its own immortality through the very human desire for mystery, for meaning, for truth, no matter how terrifying that truth might be. It finds someone to finish it, someone to truly understand its profound nature, and then that person becomes its unwitting guardian, its devoted storyteller, compelled to pass on the torch. The killing wasn't an ending, but a transformation, a forced assimilation into a larger, eternal narrative. He turned back to Jessica, his eyes holding an intensity that was both terrifying and utterly compelling, an ancient fire burning within them. "And now, Jessica," he said, his voice softer, yet infinitely more powerful, "you have finished it. You have heard the story to its very end. You have understood its true nature by witnessing its ultimate manifestation." Jessica gasped, a profound, chilling realization dawning in her eyes that mirrored the one that had just struck me, the one that is perhaps, at this very moment, striking you, my dear listener. "Because, you see, I have told you this story. I have researched it, recounted every detail, every chilling twist, every agonizing turn. I have brought you to this moment, to the precipice of its ultimate conclusion, and in doing so I have finished it. I have completed the narrative that has haunted me, that has consumed my thoughts, that has compelled me to speak these very words into existence, day after day, part after part. The story that kills whoever finishes it. It doesn't kill your breath or your heartbeat. It doesn't extinguish your physical flame. No, its method is far more insidious, far more permanent. It kills your perception of reality. It kills your ability to simply forget it, to dismiss it as mere fiction. It plants itself so deeply within your consciousness that you become a part of its endless cycle, an integral component of its eternal propagation. And now you, my dear listener, by hearing every single word, by following every thread, by reaching this ultimate final point, by allowing my voice to guide you to this very end, you too have finished it. You have allowed it to complete its circuit, to fulfill its purpose. You have become its witness, its confidant, its unwitting accomplice, its newest vessel. Do you feel it? That subtle shift in your awareness? That persistent echo in your mind? A new clarity? A new understanding that wasn't there before? The sudden, undeniable urge to share this tale, to unravel its implications with others, to see their reactions, to perhaps even see their own transformation? That, my friends, is the story living on. It has jumped from the ancient glyph to Michael, to me the storyteller, and now to you the finisher. It does not kill, not in the vulgar physical sense. Propagates. It transforms. It makes you a part of itself, forever bound to its narrative, forever compelled to carry its truth. And the only way to truly escape it is to pass it on, to tell it again, to find new ears, new minds, new voices so that they may finish it too. It's a beautiful, terrifying, immortal parasite of the mind, a conceptual virus that seeks only to exist, and we are all now its willing, eternal hosts.